In my 35 years on the bench here in Providence, Rhode Island, I have seen every kind of person walk through those courtroom doors, young and old, rich and struggling, confident and terrified. But I want to tell you, I was not prepared for the morning a man who looked like he could lift my entire bench over his head walked into courtroom 1, folded himself into one of my defendant chairs, and waited his turn with the quiet patience of a monk. And my friends, what happened next is one of those stories that reminds me exactly why I still put on this robe every single morning with gratitude in my heart. Subscribe to this channel right now if you haven't already, because this story is going to surprise you in the best possible way. His name on the docket was Marcus Reed, 29 years old. The charge, 2 unpaid parking violations totaling $94 and a failure to appear on the original court date. Now, failure to appear, that is something I take seriously. When someone does not show up for their court date, it tells me something, or at least I think it does. I have learned over 3.5 decades that I'm not always right about what it tells me. I looked at the paperwork. 2 tickets, Westminster Street and Atwells Avenue, both during evening hours, both in areas near the Civic Center. I noted that. I set it aside in the back of my mind, the way I do with details that might mean something later. Then Marcus Reed walked up to my bench. Now, I want to paint you a picture, because this is a detail that matters for understanding everything that followed. Marcus Reed was, there is no other word for it, enormous. 6 feet 4 inches, I estimated. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 260 pounds, all of it apparently constructed from something considerably denser than ordinary human tissue. He was wearing a crisp white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, dark slacks, dress shoes that were polished. His hands, when he placed them on the edge of the defendant's stand, were roughly the size of my legal notepad. The gallery, and we had a good crowd that morning, as we often do when the Caught in Providence cameras are running, went noticeably quiet, not afraid, just aware. When a person of that physical presence enters a space, the room acknowledges it. That is simply physics. Inspector Quinn, standing to my left, glanced over at me with an expression that I can only describe as professionally neutral, but personally entertained. I knew that look. It was the look that said, "Well, Judge, this should be interesting. But here is the thing, and this is the thing I want you to hold in your mind as I tell you this story. Size tells you nothing about character, nothing. I learned that from my father, who was a small man by any physical measure, and one of the largest human beings I have ever known in terms of what he carried inside him. He came from Italy with calluses on his hands and principles in his bones, and he never once let the size of his circumstances determine the size of his integrity. Marcus Reed was about to teach me that same lesson from the opposite direction. Hit that like button right now if you believe that you cannot judge a book by its cover, because this story is proof. I looked up at Marcus Reed and I said, in my standard opening, "Good morning. I see you have 2 violations here, and I also see that you missed your original court date. Can you help me understand that?" And Marcus Reed, this man who could have physically intimidated every person in that room without saying a single word, looked at me directly, with clear eyes, and said, "Yes, Your Honor. I apologize for missing that date. That was my mistake, and I take full responsibility for it. I was traveling for work and I missed the notification. I should have had a better system in place. I'm sorry. I want to tell you, in 35 years on this bench I have heard a lot of apologies. I have developed what I consider to be a fairly reliable internal instrument for measuring the difference between a genuine apology and a strategic one. An apology designed to move me versus an apology that comes from actual accountability. Marcus Reed's apology was genuine. I felt it immediately. I said, "I appreciate that. Let me ask you something. Yet you said traveling for work. What kind of work brings you to Providence and then takes you away on short notice?" He paused for just a moment. Not evasively, but the way someone pauses when they are deciding how much context to offer. Then he said, "I'm a professional wrestler, Your Honor. I work for a national promotion. We travel most of the year. I was in Providence for a series of shows, which is why the tickets are from this area. And then we moved to the next city before I had a chance to deal with them." The gallery stirred. Not loudly, my gallery knows better, but there was a perceptible shift in energy, people leaning slightly forward, nudging each other. I heard one person in the back row whisper something to the person beside them. I caught Inspector Quinn's eye again. He had the expression of a man who is working very hard to maintain his composure. I, on the other hand, felt something entirely different from what you might expect. I felt curiosity, genuine curiosity, because the story of a professional wrestler standing before me in Providence, Rhode Island, accountable and composed and apologetic, was beginning to have the shape of something more interesting than 2 parking tickets. Before I tell you what I found out next, and my friends, what Marcus Reed shared with me in that courtroom shifted the entire character of this case. I want you to subscribe to this channel and share this video right now, because the next part of this story is one that I think about often, even now. It is about more than wrestling. It is about where people come from and what they carry and how they show up when no one is requiring them to show up with grace. Keep watching. I said, a professional wrestler. I have to ask, are we talking about the kind of wrestling I see on television? The big productions? He smiled. It was a good smile, warm and slightly self-aware. Yes, Your Honor, that's the one. All right, I said, and I noticed people in the gallery smiling too. There was a lightness in the room that had not been there 30 seconds before. That is one of the things I love about this courtroom. It is a serious place, but it is also a human place. And human beings, when given permission, will find the warmth in almost any situation. So you travel most of the year. You were here for shows, you got these tickets, and then the schedule moved you on before you could address them. That's correct, Your Honor, and I want to say, I know that's not a legal excuse. The tickets are valid. I parked where I shouldn't have parked, twice. I'm not here to argue the violations. I'm here to pay them and to apologize for not coming to court when I should have. I set my pen down. I looked at him for a moment. You know, I said, I don't hear that very often in quite those words. Most people come in here wanting to tell me why the ticket was wrong. You came in to tell me why you were wrong. That is noted. That matters to me. He nodded. My mother raised me to own my mistakes, Your Honor. She said a man who can't admit when he's wrong can't be trusted with anything important. My throat tightened, just slightly, because my mother said something almost identical when I was young, almost word for word. I thought about her, about the woman who pressed my shirts for school and reminded me every day that how you carry yourself in this world is the one thing that no one can ever take from you. I thought about that, looking at this enormous young man in his polished shoes who had just quoted his mother to me in a courtroom in Providence. I said, Your mother sounds like a very wise woman. She is, he said, and just for a moment, just one unguarded moment, something moved across his face. Not sadness exactly, more like tenderness, the kind that comes with loving someone who is not close by. Is she well? I asked. Another small pause. She's doing all right, Your Honor. She had some health challenges this past year. That's actually part of why I've been working as much as I have. The travel schedule has been heavy. I've been trying to take care of her from a distance, which, as you might imagine, is complicated. There it was, that thing I was telling you about. Behind every case and every single case, no matter how small it looks on paper, there is a human life in full. A son, far from home, working as hard as his body will allow, carrying his mother's medical needs from city to city in a bag with his wrestling gear. A parking ticket on Atwell's Avenue is just the surface. Beneath it is a story about love and responsibility and the cost of both. What am I going to do with you? That is the question I ask. And the answer was already forming itself in my mind with a clarity that surprised even me, but there was still more to learn. And my friends, what Inspector Quinn brought to my attention next, what he quietly placed on my bench with a look that I will never forget, changed this case in a way I could not have anticipated. If you are still watching, leave a comment right now and tell me you are here, because what is coming in the next part of this story is something truly special. Inspector Quinn approached the bench. He leaned in and said very quietly, Judge, I think you should know. I looked up Mr. Reed when he was called. He has been doing outreach work at the youth center on Broad Street. The director there called in this morning when they heard he was on the docket. They wanted to vouch for him. Apparently he has been volunteering there for the past 3 years, every time he comes through Providence, working with kids, no charge, just shows up and gives his time. I looked at Inspector Quinn for a moment. Then I looked at Marcus Reed. 3 years, every time he came through Providence, with kids, quietly, without announcement. I have a saying that I have carried with me for a long time. The truest measure of a person's character is what they do when nobody is watching and nobody is keeping score. Marcus Reed had been coming to that youth center for 3 years, and it had never once appeared on a docket or a press release. I only knew about it because a director had picked up the phone out of loyalty and respect. I leaned forward. Mr. Reed, I said, I understand you do some volunteer work here in Providence when your schedule brings you through. He looked briefly, not at the gallery, not at Inspector Quinn, but at the floor, the look of someone who is slightly embarrassed by being recognized for something they considered private. Yes, Your Honor, I do some work with the youth center on Broad Street. Nothing formal, I grew up with not a lot of resources, in a neighborhood that didn't have many places for kids to go. When I found wrestling, it gave me structure and purpose and something to work toward. I just try to share that with kids who might need the same thing. The room was completely silent. I mean that literally. I have been in that courtroom for 35 years and I know it sounds. The shuffle of papers, the occasional cough, the ambient noise of a room full of people. In that moment there was nothing. Every person in that gallery was holding very still, holding what they had just heard. The prosecutor, Torres, steady and sharp as always, he had his pen in his hand, but he was not writing. He was simply looking at Marcus Reed with the expression of a man recalibrating his understanding of the situation in front of him. Before I tell you my ruling, and I want you to hear not just the ruling but the reason behind it, because the reason is the whole point, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that the biggest, strongest people in the room are sometimes the ones carrying the most grace. This is that story. I sat back. I thought for a moment. I thought about the law, which was clear. The violations were valid. The failure to appear was real, and there was a process for addressing both. I thought about the man standing in front of me who had come here without excuses and without performance, who had paid in advance with 3 years of quiet service to children who needed someone to show up for them. I thought about my father who used to say, "Frankie, justice is not about punishment. It is about balance. You restore balance, and you have done your job." Marcus Reed had not come to my courtroom looking for mercy. He had come looking to do the right thing. My job in that moment was to meet that with something worthy of it. I said, "Mr. Reed, I'm going to address both of these violations today, and I'm going to explain my reasoning carefully because I want the record to reflect the full picture. The 2 parking violations, those are valid. I'm not going to pretend they aren't. However, given your voluntary appearance, your candor with this court, and the documented community service you have provided to this city over 3 years, I am reducing both fines by half. You'll pay $47 rather than $94, and that can be paid at the clerk's window before you leave today." He nodded immediately. "Of course, Your Honor. Thank you." "As for the failure to appear," I continued, "I am marking that satisfied given your voluntary return to this court and the explanation provided, which I find credible and which is consistent with the character I have observed this morning. I am not penalizing you further for it." I paused, and then I said something that I do not say every day because I believe in the importance of meaning it when I do say it. "Mr. Reed, I want you to know something. In this courtroom, we see people at some of their most vulnerable moments. People who are scared, overwhelmed, ashamed. What I rarely see is someone who walks in here simply ready to stand in front of what they've done and take responsibility for it without conditions. You did that this morning. And the work you are doing with those young people on Broad Street, that is work that matters. That is work that changes lives. You are a good person. Keep being that." Marcus Reed, this man who performed in front of thousands of screaming fans, who absorbed physical punishment for a living, who traveled from city to city carrying his mother's medical bills in his heart, that man's eyes went slightly bright, just for a moment. He pressed his lips together and he nodded, the way people do when words have landed somewhere they were not entirely expecting. "God bless you," I said. "Take care of yourself. Take care of your mother." "Thank you, Your Honor," he said. His voice was steady but warm. "God bless you too." And the gallery, my friends, the gallery started clapping, spontaneously. Just a handful of people at first, and then more. I held up my hand gently to quiet it because I run a proper courtroom and I always will. But I will admit to you privately, I did not quiet it immediately. I let it breathe for just a moment, because Marcus Reed had earned it, and the people in those seats knew it. Inspector Quinn leaned over to me afterward and said very quietly, "Judge, that's going to be a good one for the show." And he smiled the smile of a man who has been watching justice served in this building for a very long time and still finds it moving. God bless Inspector Quinn. Now here is the part of this story that matters most, and I want you to hear it carefully. 3 months later, I received a letter at the courthouse. Handwritten, neat, careful handwriting on plain paper. It was from a 16-year-old boy named Darius, who wrote to tell me that he had been at the youth center on Broad Street when a big man named Marcus came in and spent an afternoon talking to the kids about discipline and respect and what it means to build something with your body and your work ethic. Darius wrote, "He told us that he once stood before a judge in Providence and the judge taught him that respect is what you give first before you know what you're going to get back. I think about that every day now. I read that letter 3 times. The first time I read it, I thought about Marcus Reed. The second time, I thought about Darius, 16 years old and paying attention. The third time, I thought about my father again, the way I so often do in moments like this, because my father was the kind of man who believed that the things we do ripple outward in ways we cannot fully see or track. He believed that a single act of decency could touch 10 lives we never knew about. He lived that way. He raised me to live that way. Marcus Reed came to courtroom 1 to pay for 2 parking tickets. What he left behind was a story that a 16-year-old boy carried with him as a lesson about respect. That is the courtroom I believe in. That is the justice I have spent 35 years trying to practice. Not perfect, not always neat, but real and human and full of the possibility that even the smallest encounter, handled with dignity, can echo somewhere you will never fully know. Let me tell you something, my friends. I am often asked by people, after they watch Caught in Providence, after they write to us, after they share these stories with their families, they ask me, do you ever get tired? Do you ever look at that docket and wonder if it matters? And my honest answer is this: not once. Not one single morning. Because every name on that docket is a person. Every person is a world. And every world deserves to be treated with the kind of care that my father taught me by example before he ever said a word about it. That is the whole job. That is the whole beautiful, difficult, sacred job. If Marcus Reed's story moved you today, if something in this reminded you of the importance of showing up with integrity even when no one is requiring it of you, then leave a comment below. Tell me about someone in your life who shows up quietly without applause and does the right thing. Tell me their name. Let us honor them right here in these comments because they deserve it. Subscribe to this channel. Share this video. These stories are worth telling and worth hearing, and I am grateful every single day that I get to tell them. God bless each and every one of you. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Show up with grace, even when, especially when, nobody is watching. And I promise you this, nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the case that walked through my courtroom doors the very next week.